It begins with a plan so bold it almost sounded impossible. September 1944. The Second World War is entering a decisive phase. Allied forces are pushing through Europe, and there's a growing belief maybe the end is closer than anyone expected. But victory doesn't come from caution, it comes from risk. And the plan they were about to launch? It wasn't just risky, it was one of the most ambitious military operations ever conceived. They called it Operation Market Garden, a daring strategy that aimed to cut through enemy territory, capture a chain of critical bridges in the Netherlands, and open a direct route into the heart of Germany. If it worked, the war in Europe could end months earlier than expected. But if it failed, the cost would be devastating. And years later, that very story would be brought to life in one of the most ambitious war films ever made, A Bridge Too Far. But here's the thing, most people never realize the story behind the film is just as intense as the battle itself. From actors who had lived through the war to real soldiers recreating history, to production choices that pushed filmmaking to its limits, this isn't just a movie. It's a collision between cinema and reality. And today, we're going far beyond the surface. Because what you're about to hear isn't just trivia, it's the hidden story behind one of the most powerful war films ever created. Here are 20 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up. Number 1. Before the first aircraft took off, before the first soldier touched the ground, there was already doubt. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, measured, almost easy to ignore. British General Frederick Browning studied the operation carefully. On paper, it looked brilliant. Fast-moving airborne troops would seize key bridges, while ground forces raced forward to link up with them. Timing would be everything. Precision would be everything. And yet, something didn't sit right. Looking over the plan, Browning reportedly turned to Field Marshal Montgomery and said, "I think we may be going a bridge too far." No raised voices, no argument, just a sentence. 6 simple words. But those words would go on to echo through history, because what followed was exactly what he feared. The operation began on September 17, 1944. Thousands of paratroopers descended into enemy territory. Initial progress looked promising. Bridges were captured, positions secured, but then delays, unexpected resistance, miscommunication, and slowly the cracks began to show. The final objective, the bridge at Arnhem, became the breaking point. Isolated, outnumbered, and cut off from reinforcements, Allied troops fought desperately to hold their position. They couldn't. The operation failed. And in the aftermath, that quiet sentence, "A bridge too far," became more than just a remark. It became a symbol, a shorthand for ambition that pushed beyond reality. Years later, author Cornelius Ryan chose those exact words as the title of his book. And when the film adaptation was made, the name stayed, because nothing else captured the story quite as perfectly. And maybe that's what makes it so powerful. It wasn't shouted in a war room, it was whispered and ignored. Number 2. Now imagine this. You walk into a movie theater. The lights dim, the screen fades in, and one by one the names start appearing. Sean Connery, Robert Redford, Anthony Hopkins, Michael Caine, Gene Hackman, Laurence Olivier, and it just keeps going. It almost doesn't feel real, because even today, assembling a cast like that would be nearly impossible. But in the 1970s, it was unheard of. So how did it happen? The answer comes down to one man, producer Joseph E. Levine. He didn't just want to make a war movie, he wanted to make the war movie. The kind people would still talk about decades later. To do that, he needed more than a strong script. He needed presence, star power, performances that could carry the weight of real history. So he made a bold move. Instead of offering massive salaries, he offered something different, a chance to be part of something meaningful. And surprisingly, it worked. Many of these actors agreed to take lower pay than they normally would. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to be part of the story. Think about that. At the height of their careers, some of the biggest names in Hollywood chose passion over paycheck. And when filming began, it created something rare. A set filled with legends, not competing, but collaborating. Each actor stepping into the shoes of real historical figures, each performance adding another layer to a story that was already larger than life. The result? A film where even the smallest roles feel important. Because behind every face, there's weight, there's history, there's intention. And that's something audiences can feel even if they can't immediately explain why. And we're just getting started, because what comes next goes even deeper. Real war experiences carried onto the set, locations that had to be completely reimagined, and moments during filming that became just as intense as the story itself. So if you're enjoying this so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because Fact 3 changes everything about how this story came to life. Number 3. Long before the cameras started rolling, before casting decisions, before locations were scouted, there was a man quietly building this story from the ground up. His name was Cornelius Ryan. He wasn't just writing a book, he was reconstructing history. Ryan spent years tracking down soldiers from both sides of Operation Market Garden. He conducted hundreds of interviews, collecting first-hand accounts from men who had lived through the chaos, the confusion, and the consequences of those 9 days in September 1944. Every detail mattered. Where they landed, what they saw, what they felt when things started going wrong. This wasn't secondhand storytelling, this was memory raw and unfiltered. But while Ryan was working on what would become A Bridge Too Far, something else was happening behind the scenes. His health was failing. Diagnosed with a serious illness, Ryan knew time wasn't on his side, and yet he kept going. Interview after interview, page after page. He wasn't just writing a book anymore. He was racing against the clock. When the book was finally published in 1974, it was immediately recognized as something special, detailed, powerful, and deeply human. But Ryan never got to see how far his work would go. He passed away later that same year. Before the film, before the global audience, before his story reached millions. And that changes how you see the film. Because every scene, every character, every moment of tension, it all traces back to one man who made sure those voices were never lost. In a way, the film isn't just about the battle, it's part of his legacy. Fact 4. For most actors, stepping into a role means research, rehearsal, and imagination. But for Dirk Bogarde, it meant something very different, because he didn't need to imagine war. He had already seen it. Before becoming a well-known actor, Bogarde served in the British Army during World War II. And near the end of the war, he was among the first Allied soldiers to enter the Bergen-Belsen camp after its liberation. What he witnessed there stayed with him for the rest of his life. Scenes that no training prepares you for. Images that don't fade. So, when he was cast as General Frederick Browning, he wasn't just learning lines or studying military strategy, he was revisiting a part of his own past. And people on set noticed. There was a stillness in his performance, a quiet intensity that didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived. Because it was. In a film filled with powerful performances, Bogarde stands out in a subtle way. Not through volume or dramatic moments, but through presence, the kind that comes from experience. And once you know that, it's impossible to watch his scenes the same way again. Number 5. Now, here's something most viewers never realize. The most important location in the entire story, the bridge at Arnhem, isn't actually the one you see in the film. By the time production began, the original bridge from 1944 was gone, destroyed during the war, and replaced with a newer structure that looked completely different. For a film built on authenticity, that was a major problem, because this wasn't just any location. This was the location, the final objective, the turning point, the place where everything either succeeded or failed. So what do you do when the real location no longer matches history? You find a way to recreate it. The production team searched across the Netherlands until they found a near-perfect match in the city of Deventer. The bridge there had the right shape, the right scale, and most importantly, the right feeling. But it still wasn't enough. They transformed it. Set designers added period details, adjusted structures, controlled camera angles. Every shot carefully planned to maintain the illusion. And it worked. So well, in fact, that most audiences never questioned it. They believed they were looking at Arnhem. And that's the power of filmmaking at its best, not just showing you something, but convincing you it's real. At this point, you might think you've seen the most impressive parts of this production. The research, the performances, the attention to detail. But what comes next raises the stakes even higher. Because in the next segment, we're stepping into moments where filming itself became unpredictable, where actors faced real danger, and where the line between movie making and reality almost disappeared. And trust me, fact 6 might surprise you. Number 6. When Gene Hackman signed on to play Polish General Stanislaw Sosabowski, it seemed like a perfect match on paper. Hackman had the presence, the intensity, the ability to portray a leader who wasn't afraid to challenge authority. Because Sosabowski wasn't just any commander. He was one of the few who openly questioned Operation Market Garden from the very beginning. He saw the flaws, the risks, the overconfidence, and he wasn't quiet about it. But bringing that character to life came with an unexpected challenge: the voice. To portray Sosabowski accurately, Hackman needed to adopt a Polish accent, and not just any accent, but one that felt natural, believable, and consistent throughout the film. So he worked at it. Dialect coaches, audio recordings, rehearsals over and over again. But even with all that effort, something didn't click. Hackman later admitted it was one of the toughest challenges of his career. The accent never fully settled into place the way he wanted it to. And audiences noticed. Some appreciated the attempt, Others found it distracting. But here's the interesting part. Even when the voice wasn't perfect, the performance still worked, because what Hackman captured flawlessly was the spirit of Sosabowski, the frustration of being ignored, the tension of watching a risky plan unfold, the weight of knowing what might happen next. And sometimes that emotional truth matters more than technical perfection. Number 7. Now imagine trying to recreate one of the largest airborne operations in history. Hundreds of planes, thousands of soldiers, a sky filled with parachutes. Most films would fake it, miniatures, editing tricks, clever camera work, but not this one. Director Richard Attenborough wanted something different. He wanted reality. So the production brought in over 1,000 real paratroopers, active military personnel trained for exactly this kind of operation. And they didn't just stand in the background. They jumped out of real aircraft, from real altitude, captured by cameras positioned both on the ground and in the air. What followed was something rarely seen in filmmaking. A sequence so large, so detailed, and so authentic that it blurred the line between historical recreation and actual military exercise. Coordinating it all was a massive challenge. Timing had to be exact. Aircraft had to be aligned. Cameras had to capture everything in a single flow. There was no room for chaos. And yet there was always risk, because no matter how controlled the environment was, these were still real jumps, real conditions, real variables. What you see in the film isn't an illusion. It's thousands of pounds of equipment, human precision, and trust all coming together in one moment. And that's why those scenes still hold up today. They're not just impressive, they're real. Number 8. If the parachute sequences were large-scale, the river crossing was something else entirely. In one of the film's most intense moments, soldiers attempt to cross a river under heavy fire using small, fragile boats. On screen, it's chaotic. Water splashing, explosions erupting, men struggling to stay afloat. But behind the scenes, it was just as intense. The production chose to film the sequence in real water, using practical effects instead of relying on visual tricks. That meant real boats, real currents, and controlled explosions going off nearby. But control doesn't always mean predictable. The current was stronger than expected. Some boats lost balance, others drifted off course. At one point, several boats actually capsized during filming. Actors and stunt performers found themselves fighting not just to stay in character, but to stay above water. Safety teams were on standby, ready to step in if things went wrong, and thankfully they did. But in those moments, the tension was genuine. What you see on screen, the urgency, the fear, the struggle, it isn't just performance, it's reaction. A response to a situation that pushed the limits of what a film set usually allows. And that's what makes the scene unforgettable, because it doesn't feel staged. It feels lived. By now, it's clear this wasn't an ordinary production. Every decision pushed for realism. Every scene aimed to honor the scale of the true story. But the next part of this journey takes a different turn, because now we're stepping into the challenge of storytelling itself. How do you take a massive, complex operation with dozens of real people, multiple timelines, and overlapping battles and turn it into something audiences can actually follow? That's where Fact 9 comes in. And it might be one of the most difficult parts of the entire film. Number 9. Imagine being handed a story this big, dozens of real-life figures, multiple battles happening at the same time, different locations spread across the Netherlands, and a timeline where everything overlaps. Now, imagine trying to turn that into a single film that audiences can actually follow. That was the challenge facing screenwriter William Goldman. By the time he took on A Bridge Too Far, Goldman was already one of the most respected writers in Hollywood. He had worked on major successes and knew how to craft compelling stories. But this was different, because this wasn't just storytelling, it was reconstruction. The original book by Cornelius Ryan didn't follow a simple structure. It moved between perspectives, units, and moments, reflecting the reality of how the operation unfolded. There was no single main character, no straightforward beginning, middle, and end, just events happening all at once. So Goldman had to make a decision: simplify the story and risk losing its depth, or stay true to the complexity and risk losing the audience? He chose a balance, carefully weaving multiple storylines together, giving each just enough space to matter while still pushing the overall narrative forward. It wasn't easy. In fact, Goldman later described it as one of the hardest scripts he ever wrote. But that effort is what allows the film to feel large-scale without becoming confusing. You're not just watching one story, you're watching many stories colliding in real time. Number 10. If there's one person who defined how this film feels, it's director Richard Attenborough. Because for him, this wasn't just about making a successful movie, it was about doing it right. From the very beginning, Attenborough made one thing clear: this film would not cut corners. He insisted on filming in the actual locations where events had taken place, cities like Arnhem, Nijmegen, and Eindhoven. That decision alone changed everything. Roads had to be closed. Entire areas had to be transformed to match their 1944 appearance. Modern elements had to disappear. But he didn't stop there. Attenborough brought in real veterans men who had been part of Operation Market Garden and invited them onto the set, not as spectators, but as advisors. If something looked wrong, they spoke up. And when they did, it was changed. Uniform details, equipment placement, even how soldiers moved. Every adjustment brought the film closer to reality. Because Attenborough understood something important. This wasn't just entertainment, it was representation. And getting it right mattered. Number 11. It's rare for an actor to meet the real person they're portraying. It's even rarer when that person lived through something as intense as this. But that's exactly what happened with Sean Connery. Cast as General Roy Urquhart, Connery had the opportunity to sit down with the real commander himself. And those conversations changed everything. Urquhart didn't just talk about strategy, he talked about pressure, about confusion, about what it feels like to make decisions when the outcome is uncertain and the stakes are lives. Connery listened closely. He studied not just the words, but the tone, the posture, the calmness under pressure. Because Urquhart wasn't known for dramatic outbursts, he was known for staying composed even when the situation was slipping out of control. That quiet strength became the foundation of Connery's performance. And it shows. There's a restraint in how he plays the role, a sense that everything is being held together by focus alone. It's not loud, but it's powerful. Number 12. By the time Laurence Olivier joined the film, he had already secured his place as one of the greatest actors of all time. But behind the scenes, things were far from easy. He was dealing with serious health challenges that limited his energy and made long filming days difficult. For many, that would have been a reason to step back. But not Olivier. He took on the role of a Dutch doctor, a smaller part compared to others in the film, but one filled with emotional weight. And despite his condition, he delivered. Every scene he appears in carries a quiet authority, a presence that doesn't need screen time to make an impact. The production team adapted to support him, adjusting schedules, managing workloads, making sure he could perform at his best. And the rest of the cast? They treated him with deep respect, because they knew they weren't just working with an actor, they were working with a legend. At this stage, the film had something rare, a powerful script, a director committed to truth, and performances grounded in real experience. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more personal, because for some actors, this wasn't just history, it was family, it was childhood, it was memory, and that's where we're heading next. Because Fact 13 brings the story even closer to home. Number 13. For Michael Caine, stepping into this film wasn't just about playing a role. It was about stepping back into a time that had shaped his life. As a child growing up in London during World War II, Caine experienced the Blitz firsthand. Air raid sirens, nights spent in shelters, the constant uncertainty of what might happen next. This wasn't something he had to research. It was something he remembered. And there was more. His father had served in the British Army, fighting in major campaigns across Europe. That connection gave Caine a deeper understanding of what soldiers went through, not just on the battlefield, but in their daily lives. So when he took on the role of an officer leading troops through dangerous territory, he didn't rely on guesswork. He drew from memory, from stories, from emotion, from a lifetime of understanding what war meant. That's why his performance feels so natural, because in many ways it is. Number 14. There are moments in the film where civilians appear waving, cheering, welcoming soldiers as they move through towns. At first glance, it feels like standard background acting, but look closer, because many of those people aren't actors at all. They're local citizens from the Netherlands, some of whom had actually lived through Operation Market Garden as children. They remembered the soldiers, the fear, the hope, so when filming those scenes, something unexpected happened. The emotions became real. The cheers weren't just part of a script, they were reflections of memory. For some, it felt like reliving a moment they never forgot. And for the cast and crew, it changed the atmosphere completely. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a set anymore. It was history resurfacing in real time. Number 15. By the time production wrapped, the film had reached a budget of around $25 million. Today, that might not sound unusual, but in the 1970s, it was enormous. This wasn't just a big investment, it was a gamble. The cost came from everywhere: a massive international cast, real military equipment, large-scale location shoots, complex action sequences. Everything about the film was designed to be bigger, more detailed, more ambitious. Producer Joseph E. Levine took a major financial risk to make it happen. And the results? Mixed but interesting. In the United States, the film performed modestly, but in Europe, especially in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, it was a major success. Which makes sense, because for many viewers there, this wasn't just a movie. It was part of their history. Number 16. In a film filled with battles, movement, and large-scale sequences, one of the most memorable moments is surprisingly simple. No explosions, no gunfire, no chaos. Just a man speaking. Edward Fox, portraying General Brian Horrocks, delivers a briefing to his officers before the operation begins. And it's unforgettable. The way he speaks, calm, precise, confident, pulls you in completely. Every word feels deliberate. Every pause feels intentional. It's the kind of scene that proves something important. You don't need action to create tension. You just need presence. To prepare, Fox studied recordings and footage of the real Horrocks, known for his ability to inspire and communicate clearly under pressure. And that preparation shows. Because the scene doesn't just inform the audience, it sets the tone for everything that follows. It tells you this mission matters, and it lets you feel it. At this point, the film has delivered on every level: realism, emotion, scale, performance. But as we move closer to the final facts, the story takes another turn, because now we're stepping into decisions that sparked debate, performances that divided opinion, and moments that proved even a massive production like this wasn't without controversy. And fact 17 is where that conversation begins. Number 17. When Ryan O'Neal was cast as General James Gavin, not everyone agreed with the decision. At the time, O'Neal was best known for romantic and dramatic roles, not large-scale war films. To some critics, he didn't seem like the obvious fit for a hardened military commander. There were doubts. Could he carry the role? Would audiences believe him in this setting? But the filmmakers had a different perspective. They weren't just casting based on expectations, they were casting for impact. O'Neal took the role seriously. He studied military behavior, worked on his physical presence, and committed himself to understanding the mindset of a commander responsible for thousands of lives. When the film was released, reactions were mixed. Some critics remained unconvinced, but others and many viewers saw something different. A portrayal of a younger, thoughtful leader navigating pressure in his own way. And over time, his performance found its place within the larger ensemble. Because in a film this big, every piece contributes to the whole. Number 18. In a film filled with large-scale action, sometimes the smallest moments leave the strongest impact. James Caan delivers one of those moments. His role is brief but unforgettable. In a tense situation, his character risks everything to help a fellow soldier. There's no dramatic build-up, no exaggerated heroics, just a decision. Quick, instinctive, human. What makes the scene stand out is how restrained it feels. Caan chose not to overplay it. Instead, he focused on making it feel real, like something that could happen in an instant. And that choice paid off. Because the moment doesn't feel like cinema, it feels like reality. Number 19. When A Bridge Too Far was released in 1977, the response was complicated. Critics were divided. Some praised the film's ambition, scale, and commitment to realism. Others felt it was too long, too complex, or too filled with characters to fully connect. But there was one group whose response stood above the rest. The veterans, men who had actually fought in Operation Market Garden, watched the film, and many of them saw something they hadn't seen before: recognition. Their story, often overshadowed by other major events of the war, was finally being told on a global stage. And more importantly, it was being told with care, with attention to detail, with respect, with honesty. For them, it wasn't about runtime or structure. It was about memory. And in that sense, the film succeeded in a way that went far beyond reviews. Number 20. There's something remarkable about the way this story connects past and present. In 1977, the same year the film was released, the bridge in Arnhem, rebuilt after the war, was officially renamed the John Frost Bridge. Named after Colonel John Frost, the officer who led the defense of the original bridge during the battle. But here's what makes it truly powerful. Frost himself was there. Think about that. A man who fought in one of the most intense moments of the war, standing decades later at the same location, seeing it carry his name. That's not something written in a script. That's history coming full circle. Bonus. Now for the detail that ties everything together. The film's score was composed by John Addison, a respected musician known for his work in cinema. But his connection to this story goes far deeper than music. During World War II, Addison served in the British Army. And not just anywhere. He was part of the same forces involved in the events depicted in the film. That means when he sat down to compose the score, he wasn't imagining the emotions, he had lived them. He understood the tension, the uncertainty, the weight of what had happened, and you can hear it. The music doesn't just build drama, it carries memory. It reflects something personal, something grounded in real experience, and that's what makes it different. A Bridge Too Far isn't just a war film. It's a story about ambition, what happens when a plan reaches beyond what reality can support. It's about courage not just in victory, but in moments where things don't go as expected. And it's about memory. The people who lived it, the people who told it, and the people who brought it to life on screen. From Cornelius Ryan, who dedicated his final years to preserving the truth, to Richard Attenborough, who refused to compromise on authenticity, to the actors, soldiers, and civilians who gave the film its emotional weight. This is more than cinema. It's a reconstruction of history, and decades later, it still resonates. Now here's something to think about. Which moment stayed with you the most? Was it the scale of the operation, the personal stories, or the realization of how close everything came to success? Let us know in the comments. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe because we've got more deep dives like this coming your way. Until next time, welcome to the club.